All right, so we've got this pretty interesting piece about classifying customers in SAP SD,
Yeah.
and it's all about using it for analysis.
Mm.
And we're going to like really dive into it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you know you're not dealing with SAP every day,
Exactly right.
we're going to see what we can learn here.
Yeah, the big idea is that you can group your customers based on things like, what industry they're in or how much revenue they bring in.
Okay.
It's not just about sticking labels on them.
Right.
It's about understanding them better so you can analyze your customer base better.
Gotcha.
And this piece we're looking at is a guide for people who use SAP SD.
Okay.
And specifically, it talks about something called transaction code XD02.
All right, XD02.
Got it.
So
Which is something you'd see in SAP.
let's get into the why here.
Sure.
I mean, the guide says the main reason to classify customers is for analysis.
Right.
But why is grouping data so important for analysis?
Right.
Why does that even matter?
Well, think about it this way. When you create different groups, you start to see trends and patterns that you wouldn't notice otherwise.
Okay.
So, for example, let's say you group customers by industry,
Okay.
like automotive versus technology.
Okay.
You might discover that your automotive customers take way longer to make a purchase, but then they end up spending more money on average.
Interesting.
And when you see those kinds of differences, you can come up with strategies that fit each group better.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the piece actually gives us some specific examples of what they call branche, which is industry or sector, and chiffre d'affaires, which means revenue or turnover.
Yeah.
So you could like group them based on if they're in retail or services,
Right.
or maybe categorize them by how much they spend each year.
Exactly.
Okay, so then how does this actually work in practice?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting. The guide lays out the steps within SAP.
Okay.
So first, you got to access the customer master data,
Okay.
which is where all the individual customer records live. And that's where that XD02 comes in.
Right. XD02, that's the gateway to all that.
Exactly. Then you go through authors functions, which means other functions.
Okay.
And then you find classification,
Got it.
straightforward enough.
So let's say I'm in SAP, I'm looking at a customer's record through XD02.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to classify them.
Right.
Are there any rules or things I need to know before I start?
That's a great question, and it's important.
Okay.
The guide mentions that the class's possibles, which means the possible categories you can use,
Okay.
have to be defined beforehand.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in something called customizing, which is basically where you set up and configure the system.
Interesting. So it's not just like free for all, make up whatever you want.
No, it's got to be planned out.
Okay.
And that makes sure everything's consistent and the groups actually mean something later on when you're analyzing the data.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So once you've done all the steps in XD02 and assigned classifications to your customers, what's the immediate benefit? Like, what can you actually do with this information?
Well, the guide says one of the big benefits is that you can search for customers much more easily.
Okay.
You can filter them based on their categories.
Okay.
So imagine you've got this new service you want to offer,
Okay.
and you want to target all your high revenue customers in manufacturing.
Right.
Classification lets you do that kind of outreach super efficiently.
So it's all about making things more targeted and efficient.
Exactly.
I also noticed that the piece mentioned something called CA System de Classification for more details.
Right.
Seems like there's a whole lot more to this customer classification thing in SAP than what's in this guide.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is just a little taste of a much bigger system.
Okay.
But the really cool thing is that the main idea here goes way beyond any particular software.
Okay.
And that's where it becomes relevant to everyone, even if you've never used SAP in your life.
So what you're saying is this idea of customer segmentation is something we can all apply.
Exactly.
And how might we be doing that already without even realizing it?
Well, think about it. How do you organize your email contacts? Maybe you group them by how you know them, work, friends, hobbies.
Yeah, sometimes.
Or maybe you think about the different projects you're working on and mentally categorize the people involved.
Yeah, that's true.
Even in those simple cases, making those categories helps you understand the different needs and characteristics of those groups.
That's a really good point.
So the big takeaway here is that this idea of classifying things, whether it's customers in SAP or contacts in your personal life,
Yeah.
it's a super powerful way to understand things better and analyze them more effectively.
I like that.
And this leads to a final thought for everyone listening.
Okay, hit me.
What if you started consciously classifying the information around you in new and interesting ways? What hidden patterns might you discover just by grouping things differently and then taking a closer look at those groups?
That's a really interesting challenge.
It could be a real eye-opener.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Food for thought, for sure.